Our next speaker is Mr. Mehmet Fatih Güden from the Van Yüzüncü University, who has also an interesting career from the Electrical and Electronics department at the vocational school of the university, moving to its Department of Art History and focusing now in his master thesis on the Christian religious architecture in the Gürpınar district of Van, who has already produced also a 60-minute documentary called Silent Bells, which is quite a telling title for the topic that we will be listening about. The floor is yours, Mr. Güden.
Thank you. Merhabalar. Öncelikle
Hello, good afternoon. I would first of all like to welcome you all to my presentation. It is indeed my pleasure to be involved in such an important event. I would like to express my gratitude to the organizer, ADIP, Anatolian Religions and Beliefs Platform. I completed my undergraduate education at the Department of Art History at Van Yüzüncü University. I'm currently doing my master's thesis on the subject of Christian religious architecture in Gürpınar district of Van. For nearly 10 years, I've been conducting field studies on a voluntary basis to create archives and inventory in Lake Van Basin, which is in danger. Actually, there are security problems. It is giving me great pleasure. I feel myself quite fortunate because the geography I live in is indeed one of the most special parts of the country. Since my time is limited today, I will be focusing on a specific part of one, because most of the information you would have access to in the documents, but instead I will be focusing on a certain part. Most of these places have been transformed as places of worship. Hopefully, I will have a fruitful 20-minute session. Welcome once again. Once upon a time, used to be the informal capital of Armenians. Before 1915, in a book called Armenians During the Ottoman Empire, 1878 statistical information, the Patriarchy record would show 57 monasteries. Unfortunately, only a few of them are surviving. In today's world, when we take a look at the ancient heritage, systematic research and accumulation of knowledge is rather limited. Along with this, when we take a look at Lake Van Basin, we see that unfortunately it's in a deep silence. In the normalization process, the Holy Cross Monastery and Ahtamar have been renovated. Although these are regarded to be positive steps, this restoration attracted the attention to Ahtamar, and tens of other cultural heritage monuments have been somehow neglected. In one region, we see many monuments, monasteries, and churches that have gone silent. When we consider this fact, we can say that this command is rightful. Since 1915, the tangible heritage and assets, historical assets, in order to feel and see these monuments, unfortunately, not much effort has been spent. If we are to touch upon the cultural heritage, there are some which have been subject to treasure hunting, and there are some subject to being used for other purposes, such as barns. You may even Google and see it yourself. Especially in areas where there is security surveillance, we know that there are many undiscovered monasteries There are some monasteries, historical monuments and monasteries that are included in the special security zones, and unfortunately it is not known what the conditions are regarding the relationship. Although the issue is known on a global scale, the social framework is always handled within the context of genocide. And people living in this region, social dimension has been neglected and not much has been done. So in this sense, the protection, preservation of historical and cultural sites and seeing monuments of cultural heritage. These should be seen as milestones of collective memory and steps have to be taken accordingly. In order to preserve and conserve these monuments, there should be a macro level step and it requires political will. But then again, instead of waiting for such a political will, there are some steps that may be taken at the grassroots level. Under current conditions, the values and assets and risks that these monuments are confronted with, there should be an awareness. Before I proceed with the visuals of my presentation, I would like to share with you a couple of things based on my experience. Well, according to the field study that I conducted, especially in the rural areas, the perspective of the community is towards treasure hunting. So when there is a monastery or a church near a settlement, most of the time people settled in that specific part of the country have a tendency. It may sound like blaming these people, but this is something that I have personally observed myself many times. In the rural settlements, when we take a look at the monuments, we see that they have survived because they still serve for a purpose. In brief, what I encountered, what I observed so far is that most of the monuments within the settlements are used either as barns or warehouses for hay. In some settlements, we see monasteries and churches which are sometimes consciously or unconsciously used. Materials, construction materials are taken away by the settlers and used for other purposes. So in some faraway, remote areas, some of the buildings, churches and monuments are left to the mercy of the nature, and some are, as I've said, within the security zone, so their conditions, current conditions, are not known. In addition to this, in some churches and some monasteries, there are some attempts to make some restoration. For instance, 7 churches, the monastery, for many years, the guard is doing his best to protect this, preserve this monument along with his family. And there's another monastery, again, taken under protection by the village headman. In order to enable that, the local people have to be given an awareness, and such projects would carry a significant importance. I would now like to share with you some visuals. This is Hokyat Der Meryem Monastery. This is in Van Gürpınar district. This is known by the academic circles and many research activities have been conducted, but for many years, because of the military operations undertaken here, access to this monastery is difficult and challenging. For the last 3 years, I've been trying to get the permit to travel there, and I still couldn't. This is in the southern part of Gürpınar, Van, and in Northern Valley. According to oral history, it's not concrete, but according to oral history, well-known king and queen's tombstones are here. It was used for hospital purposes at some point, and this monastery was used for and by ladies for a certain period of time. This is information I derived back in 2015 from a website. However, in a document dated 750, the apostles brought an icon of Mother Mary and stored it here. So the date goes back to the 8th or 9th century. Academic research has been conducted by my professor Yalçın Karaca, who is at the same time my advisor for my dissertation thesis. This is a monastery composed of 22 chambers, and it was quite glorious. This was before it was demolished. Let me share with you an anecdote. In the surrounding villages, Muslim couples, after getting married, would visit this monastery on Sundays and would sacrifice hand. And once they get a baby, especially if it's a girl, they name the girl after Mary. This is a bit of information I learned quite recently from the old man. For a very long time, this monastery survived. However, as the Armenians left the monastery, two Kurdish families settled in here, led their lives here, and then because of a dispute related to land, there is a conflict between the two families, and then someone lost his life, and then the monastery was abandoned. And then after 1960s, it became subject to the Lloyd of treasure hunters. I had paid a visit back a few years ago when there was the peace process, and those were the visuals I had taken. An interior, a photograph focusing on the interior. This is again the church, the main hall. This is from the front facade. And let me continue with the next structure. And this structure is from Van Bahçesaray Çatbayır village. Çatbayır is also known as Çat village in Bahçesaray, Van. And this is a part of a private, this is on a private land. Since there is no academic work conducted on this church, we are unable to date it. However, the arch structure that you see, when compared with other examples, indicate that the construction must have been dated back to the 13th, 14th century. As I paid a visit to this church, I saw a hall. I got some permission from the landowner, and when I went into the church, in one of the halls, I realized a tablet, which I think is about the background of the construction. I found this by coincidence. I contacted one museum, but I don't know whether anyone got interested. If this tablet is analyzed, I'm sure specific dates could be brought into daylight. This building is used as a warehouse. That's why it survived to this day. Next structure is again from one of the rural parts of Van. This is from Chilga village. Çiçan is the Armenian name, and Çiçan is the Kurdish name given to this village. When compared with other Armenian churches, this has a different structure. This is the Çiçan village. This looks from the exterior. And this church, when I made some scanning and research, I saw no academic research conducted, so I'm unable to date the church. However, my advisor again had conducted a search and says that the church dates back to the 17th and 18th century. Again, according to Sevan Nishanyan Maps, it's a website prepared by Sevan Nishanyan. According to a different resource on that website, it dates back to the 7th century sources saying that part of the authentic cross was stolen and brought here, and in one of the deep valleys this was found, and it is at a very difficult point to reach, and along the valley in the rural area 2 more monasteries were erected, and again this Chilga village church was used as a barn by the villagers for a very long period of time. When I went there to take a picture, this was actually what I saw. It had been demolished, the entrance. Next example is Van Gevash Dönemenç village, Advadzadin Church. This was again in a village in Van Gevash. It was subject to the activities of the treasure hunters, and it was significantly demolished. No academic work on this church, so we are unable to date the exact construction year. A couple of visuals I'd like to share with you. Yeah, you see Artos Mountain in the background and Dönemeç Village Church. And this one is this church, this structure is again included in my dissertation thesis. This is Gürpınar Erkaldı village. Kınaslan is the name, and this is the church in the village. This village church has been demolished and a brand new construction was made. 10 years ago, when I paid a visit, I saw that the semi-structure had still survived, but I suppose by now it's only a rock that's left. This bit that you see in the picture, unfortunately, the villagers exaggerated and overdid reconstruction work, and this was the entrance to the church. From here we see again another example from Yedisalkın Put village church in Gürpınar. It was converted into a house for the village headman. Here you see the access section of the church when you enter through here. Again, on Nişanyan maps, I could find some details, no academic work other than that. According to this website, Put village dated back to the 9th century, and by the 12th century it had been harmed. This is Yavuzlar Taik is the Armenian name. Yavuzlar village, rock chapel. I think it's only me knowing this area. It looks like the formation in Cappadocia. That's why it's called Vanadocia. On the right-hand side, the rock has been converted into a chapel as a cave was formed, and I discovered this by chance, by coincidence. I didn't see any reference in the academic papers. This chapel, again, near this chapel, there is a monastery kind of structure close to this chapel. Let me show you the details. This is the entrance. And there's a small niche, and it's like a small place of worship and also shelter. And this is Taik village church, again in Başkale, Yavuzlar village in Van. And according to the search I conducted in the academic resources, I could see no reference. This is the apsis. I think you can see it from the photograph. This is 200 meters from the chapel that you have just seen. Yes, as you can see, this is again from Van Başkale. It's called Vanadocia. And this is Bahçesaray Papatya village church. Through the deep valleys, you reach here. Transportation or commuting here is extremely difficult. We had gone there to make some measurements. Again, we had discovered it by pure chance during the field study. That was the entrance you just saw. And this is an Armenian cross. So this structure again is used as a warehouse for hay by the villagers. Again, one of the forgotten place of worship. From here, most of the structures that I will be talking about are structures that are already available in the academic resources. I would like to share some visuals before I conclude. This is on Çarpanak Island, Gudut Anabat Monastery. From the value and significance perspective, this is nothing inferior than Akdamar church, and this is Muradiye Surp Stepanos monastery. It is at an elevation of 2,000 meters, looking over Muradiye. Because of treasure hunting, it used to be a monastery, and only the main hall of the church had survived. This is Başkale Albayrak village, Surp Bartolomeos monastery, quite glorious, and both from the architectural perspective and from the plan features perspective, it's quite precious, but it is about to be in ruins. This is the southern shores of one lake. The reason why I show this picture is that all Tatvan, Reshadiye, all that region, there are 16, 17 monasteries that are partly surviving. And from here, I'd like to show a couple of more examples. For instance, this is Surp Harutyun monastery. It is on the tip of a peninsula. It's at a very good point. You can only have access here with a boat. This is Gevaş Garmir Ağa'nın Garmravang monastery. It's called the Red Church. Again, on the southern shores of one lake, and it is at the tip of at the bottom of a deep valley. Again, another example from Gevaş, southern shores of one lake. Gevaş Surp Thomas monastery, built on a plateau of 2,000 meters, and it dates back to the 15th century, most probably. Finally, regarding these structures, I can talk about the documentary we prepared. Silent Bells is the name of the documentary. It has been shared at various festivals. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Günden, for taking me back to Van, where I was 10 years ago, and I loved the monuments, some of the monuments you showed. Very sad story anyway. Now we move to yet another sad story.